In October of 2022, on one of my broadcasts, I had a chance to sit down and talk with Merritt College President David Johnson. What follows is our interview, and I hope you'll enjoy it.
And via podcast, where Laney College President Dr. Rudy Besikof speaks with community members and student leaders. The broadcast is supported and co-hosted by Technical Director Felicia Bridges and written, produced, and hosted by President Rudy Besikof.
Welcome to the program. We have a great show for you today. As we move the apostrophe in President's desk from the left of the S over to the right of the S, and still call it the President's desk, but we move it to the right because we are welcoming Merritt College President Dr. David Johnson to our program today.
Thank you, sir. Very erudite line there with apostrophe.
You can join us, as always, 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. Wednesdays on KGPC 96.9 Oakland. We also are pleased to say that we have all our shows, present and past, available on iTunes, or visit online at kgpc969.org and listen anytime. Our email for the show is laneypodcast@peralta.edu, and you can like us on Facebook at Laney College President's Desk Podcast, and be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Laney Podcast. I'm Rudy Besikof, Laney College President, pillar that has been serving the greater Oakland community for nearly 65 years, and it is great to have you joining us today. Felicia Bridges supports the President's Desk as our technical director and is pinch hitting today as show producer on this very special podcast. At this point, like I said, I've got a co-host today. His name is Dr. David Johnson, Merritt College. David, how are you today?
I am doing phenomenally well. How are you doing, sir?
Not bad. This is your first foray behind the mic.
My maiden voyage.
All right. And I understand for our listeners, you'll be launching a broadcast of your own.
Very soon, trying to follow in your footsteps and reach out to the people. So this is a wonderful opportunity and medium to do that. So I'm really excited.
All right. So as a novice broadcaster, podcaster, I'll give you one piece of advice. Do everything that Felicia Bridges tells you to do.
Will do.
No, it's good advice to follow. Could you tell us a little bit about what you'll be featuring on your show?
Well, it's still kind of a moving target and we want to surprise the folks, but it'll be just an opportunity to connect the community with Merritt College, some of the names that you know and maybe some that you don't. Everybody from students, trustees, community luminaries, interesting folks that I think will provide a compelling story. And I'm just really looking forward to jumping in.
Excellent. Well, I'll be sure to tune in as well, just to hear the happenings on the Merritt College campus.
Absolutely.
So you've been at Merritt College now as, I know you were Vice President of Instruction and now President. Can you just tell us a little bit about how long you've been at Merritt?
I started at Merritt in January of 2019, but I'm going to go back a bit further. You're smiling because I think you know what I'm going to say. I was in the Peralta system for many years at Berkeley City College. And I actually we applied for the same job. And he's smiling. For those of you who can't see his face, he's smiling right now.
Absolutely.
So that was my foray, my first foray to come back into Peralta. That was, when was that, like 2018?
Yeah, I think it was something like that.
Yeah, so President Besikof and I were both up for the Vice President of Instruction position at Laney College. And at the time, I was at Las Positas College. And because I knew that there was no way that I could beat President Besikof in that position, I withdrew.
You're too kind. For our listeners, I believe Las Positas is over by Livermore.
Yes, Livermore, California. And so I stayed there for a bit, and then I ultimately returned to Merritt College in 2019 as Vice President, and a year later, assumed the position of President. So I've been rocking ever since.
I know I have my own personal answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. Transition from Vice President to President, what was it like, and what were maybe some of the things you've enjoyed, and then some of the challenges?
Wow, that's a great question. I think that being the president of a college, it's funny because before I even assumed the role of the president, I always thought that the Vice President of Instruction position was the most challenging position on campus. Maybe you would agree with that, because a lot of times you're making some of the more difficult decisions while the president gets to look good. It's like, well, Vice President Besikof, please tell the people how you're counseling all the classes. I mean, that's the perception and the position that we're put in a lot of times. But I do believe that being the president, a lot more responsibility. You're forced to see things a bit more panoptically. I mean, you have to have a broad, all-encompassing view. as Harry Truman said, the buck stops with you ultimately, and it can be all consuming at times. But at the same time, it's been the best 2.5 years of my professional career. It's been great.
You mentioned Truman. Do you have a favorite US president?
Ooh, well, I could go with, Lincoln always wins or Roosevelt, but I'm gonna give you a gem. So my favorite president actually is LBJ, and I have a connection to LBJ. He's not like my great grandfather. Nobody knows. That's not a Strom Thurmond type story, anything like that. But the reason why LBJ, despite whatever people say, he's a product of his times. He was a Southerner, so we know in retrospect there's been some things that maybe been a bit unsavory about him. But I'm gonna tell you a personal story. LBJ went to college, and I forget the name of the institution. It was in Texas, but my grandfather actually was a cook in the cafeteria at that same college. At LBJ, this was his student job. He's like 20, 21 years old, right? And one day while my grandfather was at work, he gets threatened by, let's just say what it was, by a racist waiter. He threatens my grandfather. After the shift, this individual takes a butcher knife and attacks my grandfather.
That's something.
Out of nowhere, and this is at work, out of nowhere, LBJ was a big guy.
Right.
Out of nowhere, right cross basically knocks out the racist waiter and puts his arm around my grandfather, said, any more trouble out of this guy, you let me know. I'll hang with you after work and make sure you're safe. And they kind of developed a semi-friendship. And later on, my grandfather's sister, so my great aunt, actually became one of the first Black secretaries that worked in the state legislature with LBJ, and then eventually even moved to DC when he became part of Congress. So he always kind of has a soft place in my heart.
Wow, a fantastic answer, and great for sharing. You'd mentioned LBJ's height. Of course, the one enduring photo of him is 1963, November, on Air Force One getting sworn in. And just remembering in that picture, and I don't recall if it was the angle the photographer took or his actual height, but he just seemed to, everybody else seemed dwarfed by him just in that photo. One thing that was fascinating about him that I learned just by watching the American Experience documentaries that PBS puts out was his road to being elected governor of Texas. And the way they talked about the party bosses around the counties and everything, and really sounded like, for lack of a better term, political in terms of getting oneself elected, much more than say just winning a popular vote. And I always found that interesting and head scratching at the same time.
Yeah, his power of persuasion, it's well known. His ability to kind of, again, put his arm around people and was like, I'm going to need you to fill in the blank, and just kind of through the force of his personality to be able to do that. And another thing, I didn't know this was going to turn into an LBJ retrospective, but another thing that I always say is, in terms of these positions, as important as they are, it's going to maybe be a bit controversial. But as important as they are, our positions as president, always bearing in mind that the work is going to continue whether we're here or not. And just the image that the picture is that in this very fateful hour when Kennedy's assassinated, this thing just keeps on going.
Yes, it does.
LBJ, and then slide the next person in. And so it just makes me remain mindful. This thing that we do in these institutions that we steward are far greater than our roles in them.
That's true.
We put our fingerprints on and we try to make it better for the next person, but it's a larger enterprise.
One thing that I've found great in my time as president so far has been the telling of stories to not only people at my college about what's going on, but also to you as a fellow president at times, to our chancellor, Dr. Jeanette Jackson, and then also to our board of trustees.
Yes, sir.
I often feel like in a lot of ways, we're kind of that conduit so that they see the work that's being done and that they can also convey it, just as within a certain nation of people, that vehicle of telling a story, of sharing what's happening, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. I've often found that that's a very powerful part of our roles. Have you found that as well?
Yeah, it's sometimes it's actually surreal when I think of myself as being president. I mean, I've shared this with others. I have kind of I grew up right around the corner from this institution. So something that was always, it was literally the community's college, my community's college. But it's one of the things I find most edifying, being able to work with Dr. J and others at the district and our colleagues across the district as college presidents. And just, I'm very big on teamwork. So just, being part of a team and making sure that, I'm doing everything I can in my role in order to help us meet the mark and push this thing forward. But let me ask you a question, just in terms of, because you asked me about my perception of myself as president. Your family and your friends in your circle, I mean, they may have a certain, because they know, oh, well, that's Rudy, but then they also, oh, well, this is President Besikof. And so there's often kind of this interplay between the people who know you and they may marvel at your accomplishment, but at the same time, oh, that's Rudy. What's that been like in terms of you transitioning into the role of the presidency?
So I'll tell a story that actually speaks to this, and this is dating back to when I was a dean in Los Angeles. We were short on money for our athletics program, so one of the responsibilities I took on was being the public address announcer at basketball games.
Okay.
And my son came along with me one time. We had the men's and women's games back to back. It was a Saturday. So I brought him along with me and got to the game, and we said goodbye for so long. And then he went over to the stands. And at halftime of the first game, he comes over to see me and says, "Dad, that was you on the microphone. I didn't even realize it. I didn't recognize your voice." And it is interesting. I think for me, there is quite a bit of separation between when I'm president and, as you said, when I'm Rudy.
Right.
At the same time, it's good to talk about things that work and issues that we face, just because often, especially in my son's case, he's a college student, and getting his perspective and having him weigh in is good. And so just having family members engage me a little bit on things, it's actually been good. And at times it centers me in kind of that wheel that we run on with our jobs.
Yeah.
Occasionally having that conversation helps me take a step back and slow down. Has it been that way for you?
Well, it's funny that you say that. I mean, you have the fact that your son's in college, so he has a bit more of a mature perspective. I have twins. My son and daughter are both obviously 8. And kind of, I'm still the superhero at that age, when your kids are that age. So they're more so like, well, Daddy, you're the president, so you can do whatever you want to. These people work for you. And I'm like, it's actually the reverse, kids. I work for everybody on campus. I mean, you feel like you are responsible. And I don't want to say beholden because it has a negative connotation, but definitely responsible to every member of your college community. So
kind of that my job is to support you doing your job.
Absolutely. It's, service leadership or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, so it definitely helps me keep things in perspective in terms of, and they're experiencing it with me. I mean, when I'm up, on the weekends or something, I'm up on campus working, I'll bring them up and they get to kind of run around the office and see the campus and get a sense of the same thing that I got the sense of when I was 5 years old. And my father used to bring me up here to the gym to play basketball because he knew someone who had keys. My first conception of what a college even was shaped by Merritt College, because this is, and so I think that there's something valuable in that, in the sense of it's not going to be foreign to them. The idea of college or their conceptualization of college is not going to be foreign to them. They'll hopefully feel right at home when it's come time to make their college choice, whether it be Merritt or, I won't say Stanford, I'll say Cal, because I'm go Bears. But wherever they decide to go, that's hopefully.
I see our technical.
Yes, she's cheerleading in the background. Go Bears, yes.
Nobody's yet stood up for the Colorado Buffaloes. I'm waiting for that.
Go Buffs, I guess. So no, it's been good. I mean, we're just taking this journey together, and hopefully we can continue to do it for as long as possible.
Okay, so we'll hit the way back button one more time.
Okay.
At what moment did you say, I want to be a president?
Rudy Besikof with the hard-hitting questions. I would say probably was in, I don't know, it probably was not until, well, I always had a goal of wanting to be president, but it seemed like it was so far off, and it was just circumstances kind of led me here. But I think my goal was not so much, do I want to be president, but it was just, how can I stay involved in higher education for as long as possible?
That's great, and really appreciating the engaging conversation we're having here on 96.9 KGPC. take that first step? What was your first step toward becoming a president where you said, all right, I'm on this path now? I know for me, it was my doctoral dissertation, and we can talk about that later on. But what was it for you where you said, you know what, I'm going to take this road now?
Well, I would say the first inkling I had of being an administrator actually is while I was a faculty member at Berkeley City College.
Really?
I taught history and African American studies at BCC. I came to BCC in 2005, and I was running a program called PACE, Program for Adult College Education. It was an evening degree program designed to help people get through their college education. And I love I love teaching, obviously, but I also really had a deep appreciation for the administrative work I was doing as a director. And the president at the time, Dr. Wise Allen, who went on to become chancellor,
Sure.
he told me, it's like, hey, you seem to be really good at this administrative part. Go ahead and apply to be dean. So when you're ready, you'll have the hang of it. And I was like, okay. And so in 2010, I was tenure track. I was rolling along. I applied to Kenyatta College in Redwood City. Didn't really know where it was or how far it was, and just applied and went into the interview extremely relaxed because I was happy where I was.
I don't think I've ever seen you another way, just for
But yeah, that's probably true too.
For your information.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. But yeah, so it was just vintage DJ, and I just went in there and I just kept getting further along in the process. And they gave me the opportunity to be dean, and Rudy was a game changer. It was amazing, and I think that's when I started. And full disclosure, because they can't take the money back at this point, I had no clue what I was doing when I became dean. A lot of the administrative.
That being said, though, you had been staying at a Holiday Inn.
Yeah, I had the rest of the Holiday Inns. I guess I was an expert in that sense, but it's frightening thinking back to what I didn't know. But I knew some of it, but what I didn't know, what I came to know. And so I think somewhere during that journey, after about maybe year 2, when you start getting, it's like, okay, I think I got the hang of this. And I had a very, very important individual in my life. His name was Tom Moore. Tom Moore, rest his soul, was the president of Kenyatta, who took a chance on me. And just following him and looking at his leadership style and his ethics and his values, that's really when I was like, okay, and trying to emulate him, I was thinking, okay, well, maybe one day I could become a president. Because some of the things he taught me, always use influence rather than trying to use force. Because the minute you try to force someone to do it, you've already lost.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah, the importance of, educating the whole student mind, body, and spirit. A lot of lessons he taught me not only inspired me, but sustained me even today in terms of how I approach leadership. What about you?
Well, it's interesting that you said to Tom Moore, and I think you were about to say maybe every leader has a Tom Moore who encourages them along the way. And for me, I would be saying everyone has a Gary Scott, who was former dean of fine arts over at Long Beach City College when I was faculty there. And he encouraged me actually to pursue my doctoral degree. It always seemed like, as someone who was in the classroom, I was always going out of my way to find other things to do.
Right.
If I was teaching ESL, English as a second language, I was always coordinating activities or doing this and that. And when I was teaching at Long Beach City College, I worked with our learning center and would take on different assignments all the time and was encouraged to do that. And along the way, when you are in a doctoral program, you typically will find a problem and then try to address a piece of it. And that's ultimately becomes your doctoral dissertation.
Right.
And I remember when searching for mine, I looked at my dean, I remember, and a lot of the stress she and later he went through in their job. And I always thought the demands on a college dean were something that would be interesting to study and just to look at it. And when I brought that topic forward, it was immediately rejected. And I was told, find something on a bigger scale.
Right.
And I started looking through, and this, I don't know if you found this to be a great resource, the Chronicle of Higher Education.
Chronicle of Higher Ed.
Yeah, just it's amazing. You find every issue in education in there.
Right.
Back in 2008, the big issue was the fact that the number of sitting presidents would be cut in half by the stage where we are.
Yeah, right now.
It was the year 2020. It's
right.
Less than half of the nation's higher education presidents will still be in their same job.
Right.
And looking further into that article, one of the things that they said would be so badly impacted would be colleges' abilities to raise their own money when they need to.
Mm,
And so looking at that, I began to study what it is successful presidents do to raise money for their colleges.
mhm.
And having the opportunity to interview 3 community college presidents and hear their stories and look at how colleges were built, just in that labor of love, which became a 360-page document.
Yeah,
With my committee telling me add an extra chapter.
right.
Gotta love it. And actually it was very rewarding.
Were the
Just
3
in the
presidents
course-
in California?
No, it was out of state. It was
Okay.
actually in Minnesota.
Okay.
And just in the course of doing that, I said, I want to do this someday. This is where I want to go. This is my path. And early in the interview, I talked about having to tell the college's story. That is literally something a president in Minnesota that I interviewed told me.
Mhm.
Not a day goes by that study I did is not something that I don't use. I always
Wow.
use it. I always go back on it. And you have things on that like that in your life that either inspire or inform you. And I find they're often the same things.
So I won't put this on you. I'll give you the opportunity to say one of the people you've interviewed said this. So what would you say is the most challenging aspect of being a president?
I think it's been learning your whole institution.
Mhm.
Like you, I came from, as a dean, I was over academic departments.
Mhm.
As a vice president, I was over instruction, the schedule, learning about the other operations of the college and
Right.
understanding them better.
Right.
And also at times acknowledging when you don't understand, but also understanding that you have some very talented colleagues who need to do their jobs to support students. And the best job you can do is supporting them in the course of doing their jobs.
Yeah.
And I think there's that. And also just understanding audience. I think whether you're someone in a classroom or a dean over departments or a vice president over deans or a president over a college, there's always that recognition of who am I talking to and how do I change up my message. I think
Right.
that's something that's very different. I know a lot of the time we get stuck in our acronyms and our community college speak. And when you get in front of a contraption such as this microphone, you've got to say, wait a second. In this case, my listenership's my students and our community. Probably if I say SLO, well, that might resonate among our colleagues. This audience won't know that I'm talking about student learning outcomes or really the deliverables that we're looking for with everything we offer.
Yeah, I don't know. Skiff metrics is not really gonna
Yeah, the
resonate.
student-centered funding formula.
Resonate.
So just actually staying on that for a second, how do you see community college changing as we move forward?
Well, I think the thing that's staring us right in the face at the moment is, and again, it's not unique to community colleges in the Bay Area or California, or even community colleges. It's trying to adapt to the realities and exigencies that have precipitated out of the pandemic. I mean, in terms of modality of your courses, whether they're online or, more and more people are opting to be online and take their classes online.
Sure.
And obviously, that was, we know, and this is not in any way to downplay the significant, people died, we had hundreds of thousands of people, had a very, very real effect. But now as we're trying to adjust and achieve a degree of normalcy, if we're ever going to get there.
I was about to say normalcy. What's that?
Yeah, we want to meet the students where they are and provide compelling instruction in a way that's going to be meaningful to them. But at the same time, how do we want to define ourselves going forward? Do we want to be, and I got to be careful, this is not to impugn any other institution, but talked about telling the story of your college.
Sure.
I don't think the story of Merritt College is a story of online education. I don't want to become an online institution. I'll just go ahead. I'll just be on record saying that. I think that there is value in community, and not to say that you can't achieve that, virtually, but there's something about being together and the learning that happens both inside and outside the classroom at the actual institution. There's a synergy that's created. I think people are together and devoted to a common cause, the institutional mission, and they're doing that shoulder to shoulder. Again, you said, what's normalcy? We understand that
Mhm.
we're going to continue to do things. And there've been some very good things that have come out of it.
Yes, sir.
You know, necessary. I don't know if folks need to be in conference rooms having meetings every 2, 3 times a week when you can do it over Zoom. I understand that, but there are some times I think there's just certain virtue, I think, that comes out of being in each other's presence and working toward a commendable goal.
Sure. When I think about Laney, I mean, we have 159 programs. 99 of them are career education,
Yeah,
technical
I mean-
education, and for a lot of those, you need to be hands-on, you need to be on site. and
Absolutely.
I think really that's driven by what our community needs in terms of workforce and things like that. Moving forward, as we do adjust or find that new normal, as they say, at the same time, I think there's that element of being true to your community and its needs. And I think that's got to drive it. And I often find that I think finding that compass is critical.
Right.
It's important.
And I would also say too, the other big challenge is just, I think, reiterating for people the value of education. I think to a certain extent, education has been, you know, hey, I know that there are people who dropped out of whatever institutions to start their own .coms,
Sure.
and I know that the trades, you know, are a great way to go. And sometimes you don't need a formal or a liberal education, as we would say in the classic sense, but still 3 things that I think if you come to college, come to Merritt, come to Laney, come to any institution that's worth the salt, your analytical and critical thinking skills, your communication skills, and your interpersonal skills. Those are the 3 things that you're going to be able to cultivate.
And if you're in a room full of industry people, all you have to do is say soft skills.
Yeah,
And it doesn't matter what trade you're talking about. If you get a bunch of industry partners in the room and mention soft skills, they will perk up like you won't believe. And they'll talk about, as they look at the employees of tomorrow,
mhm.
that strength in the area of soft skills. Everything you just mentioned is so important.
Yeah, it's the competitive
So,
edge, irrespective of what business or industry or trade it's the competitive edge. And you can do that better than anywhere else at an institution of higher education.
As we wrap up our broadcast today, just maybe give our listeners a little bit of advice. You're in some field or some trade, or maybe you're starting out your career, but you know you want to end up in a management field of some sort. You want to be in a leadership role. What would be that hard and fast single piece of advice that you would give?
Wow.
1 sentence or less.
The word no should not be in your vocabulary.
Okay.
Just do everything that you're asked to do. I mean, I'm not saying go to prison.
And in other news, David Johnson was
Yeah, but a lot of times success is really the ability or the willingness to do what the other person won't.
excellent. Well, David, thank you so much for the time today. It's been great having you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, thank you to our listeners for tuning into the President's Desk, a program that is available on radio and podcast, hosted by me, Laney College President Rudy Besikof. Felicia, please take us home.
Thank you for tuning in to the President's Desk, a program available on radio and podcast hosted by Laney College President, Dr. Rudy Besikof. It airs each Wednesday at 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. on 96.9 KGPC. To listen to the podcast anytime, find us on kgpc969.org/current shows and click on the President's Desk. If you have a suggestion for a future show, please email us at laneypio@peralta.edu.